LaunchLeft podcast. This is Rain. I'm Summer.
You've been here before, we hope. If not, please listen, enjoy, rate, and subscribe. Follow us on all socials at LaunchLeft. LaunchLeft is a space for famed creatives to launch the next wave of music rebels. It's also an intentional space to highlight and empower all artists for whom radical creativity is not a choice, but a necessity. Today, we want to read you a little, our first ever nonprofit sponsor from hashtag Schools Not Prisons. Schools Not Prisons is the leading brand at the intersection of art, culture, and activism since 2016. Schools Not Prisons has reached millions of people and connected hundreds of artists with grassroots youth-serving organizations across the United States. Schools Not Prisons supports campaigns that are creating a new vision of safety centered on health, healing, and investing in people. Hashtag Schools Not Prisons is produced and managed by Revolve Impact, an award-winning creative agency and content studio that utilizes radical imagination, art, and culture to communicate ideas, connect brands with causes, and advance social change. For more information, visit schoolsnotprisons.us. Please go there. Please
Health,
visit.
Healing, and investing in humans.
Right?
It's about time.
It is about time. We're so happy to have Schools Not Prisons, part of LaunchLeft podcast.
Follow the hashtag Schools Not Prisons.
Yeah, and get involved. We're also happy about our guest. This is a really special guest for us, Mr. Shepard Fairey. Welcome to our show.
Thank you.
We've had the great fortune to have you as a friend and fellow artist confidant throughout the years, and to have you on the show and actually be able to talk shop is extra special, so we can share it with the world. Some of our offline conversations are now online, as it were. Welcome to the show.
Thanks. Always fun.
Summer, you first. You've got the best questions there are.
You can't put me on the spot like that.
First time I've ever put Summer on the spot that you didn't just jump in.
Okay, fine. Hi, Shep.
Hey, Summer.
So nice to see you.
Good to see you
It's been
too.
a second. Seeing as this is a music podcast and you are an artist across the board, I wanted to know, though, people mostly know you as I would say a fine artist, frankly, but they maybe don't know so much about your DJing and your love of music and your sharing of music through that forum. And I wanted to know, though, how much do you listen to music while you're painting? How much are you inspired by?
I'm listening to music as much as I can. And a lot of times while I'm working on art or design, there's music on, and I actually get irritable when there are periods where I need to just talk to other human beings and not listen to music. I don't think I'm maybe as quite as much of a fanatic as Henry Rollins. I've been reading his Fanatic book, where he's got a routine, and it's almost like his workout routine. And he's talking about music as carbs, and that's music he already knows and loves, and music as protein, and that's new music. And he sets aside time. I do it a little more organically than that, but I very much relate to his fanaticism. Music is a huge inspiration for me in terms of how it evokes images and makes me think about topics. And there are not a lot of art forms that have that dichotomy between feeling and thinking in the same way that music does. And so I've taken that model and tried to apply that to my visual art, that maybe the aesthetic equivalent of a good melody or a good beat to draw you in, but then the aesthetic equivalent of a good lyric to make you think. Music is basically my model. It's very accessible. It's very democratic. And so it's a tremendous, inspiration for everything I do. And it's just woven into my life. I incorporate lyrics into art that I make, and people are like, "That's plagiarized from Black Flag, yo." And I say no, it's inspired by Black Flag, and it's a nod, a tribute to Black Flag.
Were you ever in bands as a kid, or did you want to be in a band? Was that part of your trajectory?
The funny thing is, so much when you're in 8th grade is sort of who you hang out with, and then just timing, coincidence. You're forming. So all my friends that I was skateboarding with, the other 4 people, they decided to form a band, and then there was no spot left for me. So I did more skateboarding and went to their band practice sometimes. And they were doing covers of stuff like Anarchy in the UK by the Sex Pistols, and playing some REM songs, which, in 1984, that was fairly progressive. And I loved it, but it just didn't happen that they were like, hey, we need a bassist.
Right.
And so I collected records, and I was really into just devouring new music all the time. But it wasn't until I was 31 that I started DJing, and that was because I always thought that DJs stuck to one genre. I thought you're a hip hop DJ, you're a dance hall DJ, you're a techno DJ. And then I heard this guy Z-Trip, and he was mashing up different genres, and is technically the creator of the mashup as a term. But blending everything from classic hip hop to electro to Glenn Campbell, and making it all really, really work well together and make you want to dance to it and pump your fist to it. He's sort of the predecessor to Girl Talk. Do you know Girl Talk stuff?
No.
Girl
But
Talk
I do
is
know Z-Trip.
yeah, but it's just, you're showing your age, Summer.
I know.
But anyway, I fell in love with his ability to blend all these genres and have it be an unexpected journey where there's a blend of what's familiar, and then, whoa, this came in from left field, but this actually really works well.
Left of center, Shepard. Actually.
Yeah, and so I luckily was working on a project for a DJ movie called Scratch, and got to know Z-Trip and some of the other DJs that were involved in that project. And when we talked about music, Z-Trip said, man, you've got a big record collection. You've got great taste. Just start DJing. And so he gave me some tips, and I had some other friends that were DJs, and I just fell in love with it. To me, it was kind of like audio graphic design, where if graphic design, the idea is that you're taking some predetermined elements and typography and having to put all these things together, and you can do it well where it's really appealing, or if you don't do it right, it's pretty bland. But it goes through a lot of experimentation, finding the ingredients that I knew I liked to DJ, or would like to play, and then figuring out how they blend together. Well, it was such an exciting process of trial and error and figuring things out. It was so rewarding. I almost became more interested in doing that in my free time than doing art for a while, because art is something I've done my whole life, and music was a mystery to me. It wasn't a mystery in how it made me feel, and I understood some things about structure, but just to me, it seemed like magic that music just happens. And then when I started DJing a lot, I started to break down how things work in music, and it became a lot less intimidating, which was a really cool thing.
What's your DJ name, Shep? Come on. Bring it.
It's really goofy, but it was given to me when I was just the selector in the office picking records to play or whatever. And they started, because I'm a type 1 diabetic, my crew started calling me DJ Diabetic just because of the alliteration.
That's a great DJ name.
And then so, I came up with the slogan for DJ Diabetic, skipping the jelly, but bringing the jams.
That's great.
Nice one. Back to your irritation when there is no music. I think you said something about not that you were irritated by the silence of no music, but that you were irritated by having to possibly talk to people. Is that only when you're working, or is that like a social thing as well? I mean, because you're pretty damn social, or at least you have to be.
I've developed that side of my personality to fit in with how most of the world works. I wouldn't say I'm antisocial, but I really enjoy focusing on creating things, having some solitude, and having a soundtrack to that, but not being interrupted. And I frequently DJ my own art openings because even though small talk is something that I think is really important to do with people who are fans, it might be the only interaction they ever have with me. If I have an excuse to not do it for 4 hours, I'm really happy. And I know that I'm controlling what we're all listening to. And if I'm happy, then, hopefully other people dig it, but that's what's important.
And I think that's actually a really great part of, I love that aspect to your gallery shows is I know I'm going to get to hear Shepard's selection, DJ Diabetic selection. And it's always awesome. So
thank you.
Now, type 1 diabetes is you were born with it? Is that the difference between 2 and 1?
2 is when your pancreas just isn't able to handle the volume of sugar or carbs you're putting into your body to process it with the insulin, to make enough insulin, and therefore people run high blood sugars, which is really bad for your vascular system. Type 1 diabetics don't make any insulin, and you can develop diabetes as a baby, and that's really hard work for the parents if that happens. But it's usually triggered by an autoimmune response to a virus, an overly aggressive autoimmune response. So when I was 16, I got the flu, one of the serious ones where you're in bed and your joints ache and you're really incapacitated. And apparently at that time, my body attacking that virus was overly aggressive and destroyed all the lymph nodes in my pancreas that make insulin. And so a few weeks went by and I was tired and had to pee all the time and was losing weight. And I was a sophomore in high school, and I always wanted to use the ability to get out of school for something I wanted, like, I didn't write a paper I needed to write, or I have a test I didn't study for. So I'm going to, Dad, I don't feel good today. So when I actually didn't feel good, but I didn't have a good excuse to try to, that I needed, I didn't say anything. So then finally my vision started to get blurry. And that's when I got worried and asked, my dad's a doctor, and said, Dad, there's some weird stuff going on. He said, you're probably diabetic. He said it, he called it right away. We went to his office, did a urine stick to see what the glucose was in my urine. He was like, oh, whoa, that's off the charts. Then we checked my blood sugar. It was 600, which normal is 100.
Oh, man.
And
so you have to do insulin shots, or?
Yeah, I have an insulin pump, and I've had that since 2003. Prior to that, I did shots, and it's a tricky thing to manage. But prior to 1936, I would have been dead. So I'm
right.
Yeah.
Way to reframe it.
Yeah.
Great perception.
Speaking of reframing, or just we talked about music a little bit and art. We didn't really talk about art, but that's sort of what you're known for, and I feel like people can find all your visual art, and everybody's a huge fan of that. But something that I really love talking with you about is your activism, and how you use your art and activism to how you're an artist activist, how you join the two. I guess I'm just curious what's current for you. What's currently driving your activism?
Yeah, well, to bring it back to music, music was the model that I followed there too, because heroes of mine like Bob Marley, Public Enemy, The Clash, they were the Dead Kennedys, Bikini Kill. They're all using their music to say something socially and politically. And I think when you're in high school, you want to do whatever it takes to seem cool and progressive, or at least I did. And being into politics seemed really square, but being into social commentary and politics the way it was delivered through music seemed very cool. So, I never would have gone to this, sort of 60s beatnik hippie guy's little store and gotten the Stop the Arms Race, Not the Human Race sticker and stuck it on my parents' station wagon. And then my dad being really mad about it and trying to get it off, and it was hard to get off. Unless I was listening to the Dead Kennedys and the Clash. That would have been, that would have not been interesting to me. So,
was that your sort of first rebellion, is like, say, the, Andre the Giant sticker, placing that all around town? Was that a sort of like, was that your political rebellion? As stemming from putting it on your father's station wagon, a sticker on your father's station wagon, and him being like, trying to get it off and not being happy about it?
Well, the funny thing about the Andre sticker was that was just kind of a happy accident that was totally absurd, but I realized that it was like a Rorschach test where some people were amused by it and some people were irritated by it. So you sort of got a quick snapshot of somebody's personality by their reaction. And I also, around the same time I made the original Andre sticker, was making these stickers that was a cop grabbing a kid with a skateboard that said "Prevent Police Boredom Skateboard," and
That's awesome.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
How come? Has my head been in the sand? How come I've never even heard of that? Or
well, I made that in 1989, and
can
then
you bring it back, please?
I did a reissue print of it a few years ago. When we did a skateboard themed show in our gallery. But so that was, I was a skateboarder, and that was political in the sense of, why did the police bother harassing skateboarders so much? It's like, now I know it's low hanging fruit.
Yeah.
It's not, they aren't taking any real risks there.
Yeah.
But the path into political art also was inspired by, say, what Winston Smith did graphically for the Dead Kennedys, or what Jamie Reed did for the Sex Pistols, or some of what Raymond Pettibone was doing for Black Flag, but also what Barbara Kruger does. Do you know Barbara Kruger's work? She's Your Body is a Battleground with black and white image with the red bar. And then there was another artist named Robbie Canal, who was putting posters up in LA of Reagan during Iran-Contra-gate that said Contra above and Diction below. Yeah. And the Dead Kennedys were always skewering Reagan. So Reagan as a target, I was, that was exciting territory for me. And seeing what Robbie was doing, putting these posters on electrical boxes all around downtown LA. I happened to be on a field trip from Idlewild, where I was doing my senior year of high school at an art boarding school, into the city, and saw those around downtown on our way to Mocha. And so, me being in art school and taking art with a capital A somewhat seriously, but also being like, yeah, but that's kind of elitist, bro.
Fuck the system.
Yeah, I was, seeing, I was like, all the cool art's out on the streets. Look at what this guy's doing.
You weren't wrong.
I know. I didn't know his name, but I was really moved by those pieces. So that was an early inspiration for me. That it took a while to sort of coalesce for me making the same kind of work, but the seed was planted. What am I doing now? Now, this year I'm doing a collaboration with the ACLU, where I'm going to paint murals in battleground states and do voter registration parties.
Very cool.
For all this. And one of them is tying into your mom's project.
I heard
in
about
Gainesville.
that. Cool. I heard about that. I heard her I spent the last few days with her, and I heard her on the phone talking about the building where you were going to do finding the best one that had a great light at night. She was having a whole conversation with somebody. Cool. So that was the first time I heard that, and I was like, what? That's so awesome. And you're going to kind of tour and paint and do your murals in battleground states. So you're gonna hit the road with this sort of.
Yeah, because
that's such a great idea.
Think 2020 is a very crucial election. Yes, I think every election is crucial, but I mean, look at what we're dealing with. It's total insanity and incompetence. And it's mean. I just yesterday I was rereading what Alex Kapranos from Franz Ferdinand wrote about Trump when Franz Ferdinand recorded the song Demagogue and asked me to create the visuals for it. And
What year was that?
2016. This is a few months before the election, and or maybe even just maybe like 6 weeks before the election they put it out. But everything that he said, he released a statement and it says a demagogue is, and it's, but uninterested in the common good, only out for themselves, et cetera, et cetera. Everything that he said about Trump that maybe at the time even seemed slightly hyperbolic has been borne out, 10 times over. And I want to repost that because I think there's a fine line between being concerned and cautionary and seeming hysterical and apocalyptic. But I was I was trying to not come across as somebody.
It's time for hysteria, though,
yeah,
because apocalypse is upon
somebody
us.
that was just a melting down snowflake. Yeah. I never want to feed into that narrative, but everything I thought and everything that Alex Kapranos thought about Trump it's been way worse even, and we had pretty dire predictions. But I like Alex Kapranos is really smart. I don't know whether you like Franz Ferdinand's music or not, but
of course
he's and he's a very kind person. When I look at role models in the world, this is a guy who manages to balance being witty and make great music and cool to his girlfriend and stylish with also being incredibly thoughtful and generous. So
stop talking
really
about yourself, Shepard.
I know. Sounds like you're reading your own resume.
Come on. The only difference is wife instead of girlfriend.
Anyway,
but
I like. It feels really nice to connect with people like that in the world that make all the insanity feel abnormal rather than normal. Like there are people who are still sane around.
How do you do with going to, I assume you've done this before, but maybe not, gone to battleground states, painted a mural. I'm sure people come up and talk to you or ask questions, and some of them are not on, let's say, your side of the political field, or, how do you manage that, and how do you feel about that? And yeah, how is that experience for you? Because I'm sure you've had a few run-ins. Yeah,
I have, and I've evolved my strategy a bit from when I was younger. When I was younger, I loved to be confrontational, agitational, because it was the first assertion of me being different than the status quo, and I needed to. I needed to stand up for myself and carve out my my philosophical territory in a way that people could understand. But now I realize that frequently is a beacon to people that agree with you, but not a way to change the attitudes of people you disagree with. Now what I've been doing with my art and with the way I communicate with people is that I try not to put people on the defensive. I take what I call a Trojan horse approach. I offer them a gift. They let me in the gates. And it's with the art, I'm always trying to make sure that there's something that has an undeniable visual appeal, a humanity, something that just is universal if possible. Yeah. And there's no way to, that's subjective. So there's no way to always achieve that. But and then once you're lured, seduced, engaged, then there's all these other things that sometimes I have little vignettes that are humorous. Sometimes I have newspaper articles. Sometimes I have other symbols or verbiage that's topical or subversive. But I've found that to be a much more effective approach because people respond to art emotionally. They respond to music emotionally. But then if you have a very positive emotional experience, you want to justify that intellectually. And so that retrofitting process is where I can move the needle, I think.
That's wonderful. I mean, I'm guessing that you've had more success with your new strategy than one of agitation and force in the past, your youth version, correct?
I think so.
Yeah.
And one of the first images I learned the effectiveness of that was the Hope poster for Obama, because you can say, I don't agree with Obama's policies, or you can say, I'm not a Democrat, but really in terms of the feel of the poster, there's really nothing to attack. And so I applied that, what I think was successful about that, to other portraiture around immigration, around Islamophobia, xenophobia, around environmental destruction, just the relatable human side, that this is a person who maybe doesn't have the same religion I have, or was born in the same country, but there's something appealing about them. They're hard to hate. And using portraiture in that way in a lot of my work, and then using symbols like flowers and waves and all these things that are very cliche, but when rendered in a way that isn't cliche, it's I think I'm able to find something that is a relatable reference point, but also doesn't feel totally boring or worn out. And that's tricky. It's tricky to balance that.
All of your art is so layered and so many different ideas brought into one. How long does it take you to create the piece in your mind, from start to finish? And do you often just know when it's finished, and how?
I'm sure that, Rain, you go through this with songwriting, that you have an inspiration. Sometimes maybe it just flows. Other times a part works, and then it's hard to finish the rest of it. But I experiment relentlessly. I also create parts of things that I'm happy with, set them aside, and then work on something else. And frequently, when I'm creatively blocked on one thing, working on something totally unrelated expands the horizon again, and I find the solution through this other project I'm doing that I think is unrelated, but things bounce around, and then bam, I've got it. And sometimes it's a fast process. There have been strong pieces that I've made in a day, and then there have been other things that take weeks or months, even, where I set something aside, don't know how I'm going to use it, and then I'm working on something else literally months later, and I go, oh, I know, yeah. And sometimes I just hear a song, or I'm out in the street and I see some aspect of architecture, or a painted sign, or even a billboard about something almost completely unrelated, but there's something in a tagline or a weird juxtaposition that just triggers how I could solve a problem in something I'm doing. And so keeping my eyes open, and and a lot of things moving creatively all the time helps me to work through this. But there's a lot of juggling for me, and that sounds contradictory, because I like to focus, but I also know that if I get creative block on something I'm focusing on, that I can just move to focus on another thing, and eventually the solution will emerge.
It sounds like over time you've really discovered how how you work best too. It's interesting. Do you have that same feeling that with songwriting, to go off what you said earlier, when like that song is done? And I think Summer kind of echoed that too. Like, when do you know it's done? Like, do you have that thing where you're like, whoa, done? Walk away.
Sometimes I do, and it's very paradoxical, because I trust my instincts, but at the same time, when I when I get to where I'm happy with something, I go, this is too good to be true. Let me try 20 other things. And then I go back to where it just felt right. So, every now and then I've come up with, after the additional experimentation, come up with something that I think is slightly better. But more often, I go back to what I already really liked a lot. But in that additional experimentation, another version or an offshoot has presented itself. And so sometimes that can be a really rich vein of of experimentation. And I assume that musically you don't want all the songs to be structured the same or use the same tricks, but you develop a set of tools as you play more and more and more, and then knowing where you can branch off to use any of those techniques that you've developed is also really valuable. I love that I have 30 years now in art making and I have a lot of techniques, but the one thing I'm always afraid of is, because I have so many things that I already know how to do, not pushing myself. So I'm always trying to push myself, and the idea of my art project, the Obey Giant project, that's got recurrent motifs and colors, so that the cumulative effect of the project is part of its power, not just the individual imagery. That's important to me. But I also don't want people to get bored, so I'm always trying to evolve it. But unlike some artists where they do one body of work and it's this concept and these aesthetics, and then the next body of work looks totally different, I don't work that way. I evolve, but keep some things that are recognizable about my work always in the new body of work. Even if you look at some of the stuff I'm doing right now, and then you look at stuff that I did in the very beginning, if you didn't know what was in between, if you hadn't followed it, you might not necessarily see the connection between the two. But in any period of 3-5 years, you'll be able to see the relationship between the pieces.
Very cool.
Not to beat a dead horse or whatever they say, but I was, when you were talking about diabetes, I had originally asked about that just because, I think that, number one, it's something that afflicts many, 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 many people. And I'm always interested in the idea between adversity and creation, right? And our art. And I wonder, and I've never heard you talk about it, and I just don't know if you have found that it at all has affected your art or how you've gone about creating, or if it just in your mind has just never been connected at all.
One of the things that happened right away when I got diabetes, that my dad being a doctor and also not being a warm and fuzzy person, he said, well, the good news, son, is that you can live with this disease. The bad news is you might live 20 years less than most people. And so I just felt the clock was ticking from the moment I was diagnosed. And that's always been in the back of my mind, that I don't want to waste time. I want to produce as much as I can. And every now and then it's an unhealthy obsession, the amount that I want to put out. Last year I did 8 big art shows and murals in every city. It was extremely busy and stressful. I was working until 2:00 in the morning every night, and working weekends. It was hard on me. It was hard on my family, and I realized that even though it's important for me to get a lot done, that if I can't be comfortable in my life, if I'm just dealing with intense stress every day, not being a good friend and partner and father to my wife and kids, then that's not cool. I gotta cut back. I gotta find a better balance.
Yes, because a huge part of your value is in those roles that you play as well, not just the artist.
Yes, and I read this really big book about Che Guevara, and how he was the most Spartan and dedicated activist in Cuba. Fidel Castro was irritated with him for making him look bad because Che worked so hard. But he was not good to his family. He would try to enlist his family to do volunteer work on the weekends and, carrying bags of grain and whatever, shoveling. And it was because his entire sense of self was wrapped up into, how to build the nation and be a role model for those values.
And he was very sick as a child.
Yes,
right?
yes. And I realized that I have a little bit of that in me that I need to manage properly. That I don't think I'm quite as ego driven as Che might have been, even though his ego was completely wrapped up into doing things that were supposedly for the people,
nation,
for the nation. But I can't be a hypocrite. I've got to treat my family the way I project my values to the world.
I'm going to send us right back, I love what you said, to music, because I know you sent ahead a few things for us to take a listen to, and I'd love you to just talk about those artists and why you like their songs or their records.
Sure. Well, I sent 3 things. I was told send one, but I wanted you to be able to listen.
No,
to
I
stuff.
know, and I did. I would check them all out and was like, well, they're all really great. That's hard to pick one. But I wanted to hear, one thing we can do is have you talk about all of them on air, and then we can find one that'll for you to officially launch or not.
You when it comes to truly emerging, there's 2 acts that I picked. One is Velvet Starlings, fronted by, I think he's 16 now. He was 15 when that song was recorded.
So great, that song.
Soul Down the River. The song is called Soul Down the River.
Did I get sent this too? And I just haven't had a chance to look
God,
at it?
I don't know. I think so. Let's assume you did, but then you can yell at me later.
Okay, great.
Or now.
But
Yell at me now. Yell at me now. No.
I mean, he's into Arctic Monkeys. He's into lots of great stuff.
How do you know him?
Is this a kid from your community or?
No, he lives in Chico, California, and I painted a mural there, and he liked it. It's a peace and equality mural, and he wanted to film part of his video in front of it for the song. And so he sent me the song. I was like, I'd be honored if you did part of the video in front of this mural, because you're like a young, like Alex Turner from Arctic Monkeys mixed with Dylan or something, and he's come to LA and performed at the Hi-Hat. Rodney Bingenheimer was putting some of his music on his K-Rock show, which is now at like 4 a.m. or something, unfortunately. But I was just moved by how thoughtful and talented he was for somebody so young. I did not have my shit together like that at age 15, 16. I had some, I think, developed ideas about the world, but they hadn't manifested in creation like that yet. Right. It's just incredible. And then, the other band is core songwriters are 2 women named Taylor Blackwell and Harley Quinn Smith, who is Kevin Smith's daughter.
Yeah.
And they love Bikini Kill, and they love Hole. So, and the funny thing is that those 2 had beef, but they're like, but we like both, and we. Like we like Tupac and Biggie,
Yeah,
but anyway,
that song is fun.
Yeah, they did this song called "I Will Not Make Any Boring Art," which is a slight paraphrase of a John Baldessari art piece. He did a piece with the words repeated, and Taylor Blackwell really loves Keith Haring, and she likes my work. She came up to me at the Johnny Ramone tribute and was like, hey, and she was wearing like a military jacket with really cool pins on it. And and she started talking to me about art, and she knew a lot. And I said, oh yeah, you know a lot for a younger person. How old are you? And she goes, 20. And I was like, oh my God, I had no clue about a lot of that stuff at age 20.
I still don't.
So it was, then they made this art that's sort of in the Riot Girl. I mean, this song that I will not make boring art in the Riot Girl vein. It's cool. The band is called The 10th. And
what does that refer to? Do you know?
I don't know what it refers to.
Gotta refer to something.
I need to. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's not a random.
Yeah.
I don't think anything is.
The first thing I thought was, when you're being picked for sports, like you're not my first choice, you're my 10th.
Yeah. You're the last one.
Yeah. They seem very self-deprecating, and like they have a sense of humor about popularity and perception and everything. So I'm just speculating, but I'll have to ask. Maybe they'll hear this and be like, "You idiot!" But that's part of the fun of this stuff.
Definitely, it's art. It's open to interpretation.
Yeah.
And then the other thing you mentioned was a Deep Valley Flaming Lips collaboration, right?
Yeah,
which I just loved hearing. So thank you for.
Yeah.
I saw something about that, and I probably listened to a little, but that made me like really.
Well, the reason
It's such a cool
I
collaboration.
brought that in was because, some things are new to me. And Deep Valley, I only discovered about a year ago, even though they've been around since like 2011 or something. But Deep Valley is channeling a lot of stuff I like. They have a bit of White Stripes, Yeah Yeah Yeahs, Led Zeppelin, a pinch of Black Sabbath. It's very rockin' for a two-piece, and they're funny. Their album titles are Sistrionics and Femigism. And so there's a girl power thing that's really cool there with them. And but I also love the Flaming Lips. I love how they've gone in so many different directions over the years, and there are eras that I like more than others, but it's all really fun and strong and courageous. So of course they wanted to collaborate with Deep Valley, and it's a really beautiful song that's different from a lot of the other Deep Valley stuff. And you can hear the Flaming Lips influence, but it also doesn't sound exactly like the Flaming Lips. So it's one of those collaborations that's truly
Collaboration.
And yielding something that's not necessarily better, but at least different in an exciting way from what either band would do by themselves. And so I was excited by that because it's new. I think there's a whole album in the works. That's what a woman at Amoeba, when I was talking to her about Deep Valley, she said, "Oh yeah, they're doing a whole album with the Flaming Lips, collaborative album." So there's only the one song out now, but I'm excited to hear the rest of the album.
Just quickly, your daughters, do you have they taken on any of your creative pursuits as they're growing older? Or are they do you see them trying to sort of find their voice? Can you relate to where they're at in their lives at their ages back to when you were that age? Or do you feel like they've come so much further than you in many ways than you were at their ages? Did any of that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. They're both creative. They do these fashion classes where they draw the designs, they work on the patterns, they choose the fabrics, they sew the clothes, they design their own logos, they get up and they model the stuff, they talk about it. So
wow,
the
cool.
That's incredibly creative.
And the garments they're making are beautiful. They're really, really well done. They work with counselors. It's a place called The Unincorporated Life.
I know it on Western, right?
Yeah, Western, close to Santa Monica. And just to see how they work through this whole creative process and talk about it I'm very impressed by that. They're put into a situation where they're forced to focus on it, which I think is good.
So important.
Because the thing I worry about with them is their attention spans. Yeah. They have so many distractions. I'm grateful that there was no cool technology when I was in grade school, middle school, high school, because when I would get in trouble for staying out too late or throwing water balloons at cars, all the usual stuff. My parents would just put me on restriction. I'd be in my room and I would just draw or cut stencils, listen to music, draw, cut stencils. When I was younger, it was build model airplanes.
Wow, cut stencils, really? That makes perfect sense for the Shepard Fairey artist I know today, but I couldn't imagine being a child and that being like, sure, markers, pencils, paper, but cutting stencils?
Yeah, once I think I cut my first stencil in 8th grade. It was
why? What was the original inspiration?
I got a skateboard that was I started skateboarding in 8th grade, and I got a skateboard that was, kind of uncool graphics. So I'm older than you are, but you might remember when fluorescence, whether it was Madonna or the B-52s or whoever, everybody was using Dayglow.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the punk acts were using some of that too. And so I was just like, man, this board graphic is so uncool. I'm going to paint over it and then just spray paint the Thrasher logo on it. But I got to learn how to cut the Thrasher logo. So first stencil, Thrasher logo.
That's so cool.
Second stencil, Sid Vicious. And then,
as you do.
Yeah. And then it just, kept going, because much like the good fortune of not having YouTube and social media and everything back then, Charleston, South Carolina, where I'm from, also didn't have any way to get cool punk threads. So I had to just make my own t-shirts. And whether it was homemade skateboard t-shirts or punk t-shirts, I was just making stencils. And this was also where my first entrepreneurial spark happened. I wore my homemade Sex Pistols Sid Vicious shirt to school, and 2 people in the hallway were like, "Hey man, where'd you get that shirt?"
Yeah.
And I said, "Yeah, I made it." And they're like, "Do you have any more?" So the next time, instead of just making 1, I bought the 3-pack of white undershirts and I made 3 and sold 2.
The dawn of Obey. The dawn of Obey, the clothing brand. That's incredible. So thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much. There's so many more questions I want to ask you, and I guess it'll have to wait till next time.
Thanks for being on the show,
Thank you so much for coming in.
We love what you do in the world.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I'm Shepard Fairey on LaunchLeft. I want to launch a couple of younger artists. First, I want to launch the Velvet Starlings. I'm friends with the singer-songwriter Christian Gisborne, who wrote a fantastic song called Sold Down the River about his disappointment with promises undelivered from politicians.
We've been waiting such a long time at the station. Went through every kind of trial and tribulation. We've been cold, we've been slow, we've been searching for a diamond in a coal mine. We've been praying for a single ray of sunshine. We've been cold. Sold down the river, we've been sold to the highest bidder. Our hearts are going It's all the pennies on the dollar when they're promised us a new tomorrow. It's a tragedy and degradation for our soul. And if some piece of love can rain down on you, and if some piece of love can rain down on us all, on us all, won't be sold down the river, won't be sold to the highest bidder. It's hate and gold that makes the sinner take it all from the giver. Won't be sold down the river, won't be sold to the highest bidder. It's hate and gold that makes the sinner take all from the giver. Won't be sold. We won't be sold. Gotta make it and some change to keep it so high. 'Cause when that karma comes around to set the score right, here's a blanket and some change to keep it so high. 'Cause when that karma comes around to set the score right, 'cause when that karma comes around to set the score right, so keep it so high. Gotta keep it so high.
The second song I would like to launch is called I Will Not Make Any More Boring Art by the 10th. Harley Quinn Smith and Taylor Blackwell are the main songwriters. There's a couple of other people in the group whose names I don't know. I love this song because it's a reference to John Baldessari, a great visual artist. I'm a visual artist myself. And it's very much in the Bikini Kill Hole vein.
You stamped your stupid name on work you didn't make. They called you a genius, I called you a fake. Gorilla girls got angry when they wouldn't let us in. The men who turned their backs, we'll just put our daggers in. We'll just put our daggers in. I will not make any boring art. 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 Who made the rules of language we all agreed to follow? I know how to paint, but inside I feel hollow. Cash we didn't have was substitutes of school. I never caused villains, but I'm nobody's fool. I'm nobody's fool! I will not make any boring art. 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 Try to screw me over like they Burger King. The biggest artist you've ever fucking seen. Try to screw me over like it's Burger King. I'll be the biggest artist you've ever fucking seen. I will not make any boring art. 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 I will not make any boring art.
Hashtag Schools Not Prisons is the leading brand at the intersection of art, culture, and activism. Since 2016, hashtag Schools Not Prisons has reached millions of people and connected hundreds of artists with grassroots youth-serving organizations across the United States. Hashtag Schools Not Prisons supports campaigns that are creating a new vision of safety centered on health, healing, and investing in people. Hashtag Schools Not Prisons is produced and managed by Revolve Impact, an award-winning creative agency and content studio that utilizes radical imagination, art, and culture to communicate ideas, connect brands with causes, and advance social change. For more information, visit schoolsnotprisons.us. LaunchLeft aims to create an intentional space that highlights and empowers all artists for whom radical creativity is not a choice, but a necessity. LaunchLeft begins with music, but its ultimate aim is to launch left-of-center artists in all creative fields.
Everybody.